Today, we've kind of done a series over the last, I guess, month of, we started with doing mask tutorials. Then the last one we actually did a little simple slip skirt tutorial. And then today we're going to do a scrunchie tutorial. And the beauty of scrunchie tutorials is that you don't need a lot of fabric, you don't need a lot of supplies. And honestly, if you've had any previous projects, you'll have scrap material anyway, so it's very easy to do and make.
I have pounds of fabric.
Right? Like, and as long as you have elastic, which has kind of been hard to come by since COVID, like as long as you can have some of that, you're good to go. So I'm actually using scrap material today from the skirt project from last week. So just enough. It's probably, I would say in total, maybe a yard. I've got some longer pieces and stuff too. But yeah, it's great to keep around and do small accessories type stuff with. So today we're basically going to do, you can choose one of two sizes. And the reason I did that is I know sometimes for people who have either thinner hair or for kids, you want your circumference of your scrunchie to be a little bit different, right? So depending on how many times you want to loop it or what your hair actual thickness is. So I went ahead and wrote it out. So can y'all actually see that?
No.
Can you see it now? If not, I'm going to say it out loud anyway. So,
okay, large.
So for the large scrunchie, you're going to want your piece of fabric to be 22 inches long by 3.5 inches wide. You'll want a 9-inch long piece of elastic. If you want to do the small scrunchie, you'll have 20 inches long by 2.5 inches wide of fabric with, and I didn't put on here, 8-inch long elastic. Let me put, and then so we're actually gonna do an optional tie. If you don't want to do the tie, you don't have to, but I like doing it on there because it's versatile. You can actually use it to put on your scrunchie or by itself. The tie cut piece of fabric will be 24 inches long by 7 inches wide, so it's a little bit wider because we're gonna fold that in half to make a nice thick tie to it. And so the beauty of having the tie too is if you don't want to use it on your actual scrunchie, you can tie it like to your purse, or you can tie it around your waist as like a little wristlet type thing. So I wanted to go ahead and include that too, because if you want it to be part of an accessory, you can, and if not, you don't have to. So, so that's the cut list. Okay, so I have my cutting board out here. I also have my rotary mat. You obviously don't have to have a rotary mat, but for how much I tend to cut, I like to have one on hand because it's just easier for me. So the very first piece we're going to cut is going to be our actual scrunchie. So I'm going to do a large because I like to do my tie at least 2 times around my hair, sometimes 3 depending upon like if I've curled my hair or not and how it's thick with products. So we need a piece that is 22 inches long and 3.5 inches wide. So first I'll use my handy dandy cutting board grid here. I'll start on the 22. So let me grab my scissors actually. It's easier. So I'm just measuring out my length first. I'll mark it and then I will mark my width. So 22 inches long. That's right. I'm going to cut off my selvage edge because I'm going opposite. And then width, we want it to be 3.5 because we're actually going to fold it in half to sew it into the machine. So and it really depends on, so that thickness of the 3.5 depends on what you personally want. So I know for me, like if you want a thicker scrunchie that has more fabric, like you see these oversized type scrunchies, right? If you want something that has more fabric substance to it, you're going to want your width to be wider. If you want it to be more of a narrow scrunchie, you're going to want to be smaller. So the suggested is 3.5. That's probably going to be your standard scrunchie because once we fold it in half and put it through the machine, that's going to bring us down to about 1.5 inches wide. So your finished material would only be about this wide right here. I'm going to go ahead and do 4 just to have extra. I prefer the extra. I like it to be a little bit thicker. That's just me. So instead of doing the 3.5, I'm going to do mine at 4. So I'm going to mark 4. And the thing about this is it's such an easy project that you can customize this to whatever you need, right? Like it's pretty simplistic as far as measurement goes. Okay, so that's going to be my 22 by 4 here for my scrunchie. So I'm just going to go ahead, cut this end off really quick. And I'm going to go ahead and just, I already have kind of my straight edge over here. It's a little wonky, but honestly it's so fluffy you won't tell. And we're going to come right down here down this side. And remove my pins. So this is going to be our actual scrunchie fabric. Right there. Put that to the side. Go ahead and cut your elastic. So suggested is 9 inches long elastic. When we actually put it together, if you're looking at the actual length of this, once we sew it shut, the total circumference is not going to be 9 because obviously we have to overlap it to seal it shut. We will probably more or less end up with about 8 inches of elastic. So depending upon, you think about it this way, if you're going to be sewing it, it's 1 inch off of whatever we make it to be. So if your elastic is more thick and it's more taut, you might want to make your elastic a little bit bigger if you like multiple wraps. It's completely up to you, but again, the suggested is 9. So I'm going to cut mine to 9. Just like that. And then since I'm making it for myself, I want to go ahead and make the tie too, because I think the tie is cute, and I know that since I'm making out of a plain black kind of crushed satin fabric, I'm going to use it a lot. So the tie itself is going to be 24 inches long by 7 inches wide, so it's a bit wider. Let me check what I got here. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to measure out my tie. Again, using this scrap here. I'm actually going to go ahead and give myself a straight edge here because my fabric is a bit wonky on this edge. Just straighten this out a bit. Okay. All right, so now I'm giving myself my straight edge here. I'm going to cut my 7 inches wide by 24 inches long, because again, what we're going to do is fold this in half and sew it, and then you're folding in half again to tie it onto your scrunchie. We want it to be decently long. And so again, customizing to you. If you are a smaller person, you don't want as long as a tie. I guesstimated 24 inches, because due to the fact we do 24, that means it's going to be 12 when it's in half. And you're going to use about 1 inch to 2 inches for your actual knot when it's on your scrunchie. So my tie will be about that long. So if you want it to be a little bit shorter, you can go to like a 22 or 20. I just chose 24 based upon how long I personally want it to be. So now we've got my straight edge here. I'm going to cut this tie 24 by 7 inches. And because it's faster with prettier lines, I'm going to use my rotary cutter. Make sure this is on my grid straight. So I've got 7 by 24, because 24 is the total length of my little mat here. So I'm just going to go all the way down to the end. And cut across. There we are. So that is my tie fabric. So now we've got our scrunchy fabric cut. We now have our ties done. So we're ready to go back to our sewing machine. Okay, so now we're gonna go back to our machine. I have mine already threaded up with black to match my scrunchie. So now let's go ahead. So when we're sewing these, everything that we've done, we are going to fold in half to sew, right? So that's my time. I'm gonna put that to the side. So if we're looking at our scrunch material, you're looking at the right side of the material. You're gonna fold the right side of material over on itself to match it to the opposite side. And down this side is where we're going to sew our seam to close up the end of our scrunchie. When we're doing this though, we're actually gonna leave about 1 inch to 1.5 inches at the end of each side of our scrunchie, because that's what we need once we turn it to close up the scrunchie. So put like a little pin about 1.5 inches away from the end, so you know where it's at. So again, folding right sides onto itself. Same thing for the other end. I'm gonna put a pin here to remind myself, do not stitch past this. Okay. And in my case, I'm using a really silky fabric. You can use cottons, you can use honestly, pretty much anything. I will say the more that you use a silky fabric, it's not gonna have as much grip to your hair, because obviously it's softer and it's gonna want to slide a bit. This is actually really good if you do athletics, if you want to use like a lycra or a spandex blend that's kind of cute, you can do that. Honestly, any fabric's really good. Cotton works very, very well. I've made several with the pandemic doing masks that match my scrunchies, and they turned out super cute. So now I've pinned all the way down my end here. Again, I'm not going to sew here or here, but from this pin to this pin, and then we're going to turn it inside out for our scrunchie. I'm going to start that 1.5 inches in. I'm doing about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is going to be between your 1/4 and your 1/2 on your machine for its actual measurements. As always, you back stitch when you start. I'm just going to go down the way here, taking out the pins as I go, so I don't break any needles, because that is not fun. So again, I'm stopping at this pin here, because we're now going to turn this inside out. So now I have my piece sewn on that one side. And if you have anything that you need to trim from the interior, now's the time to do it before we flip it. So now we're going to take our piece that is going to be our scrunchie, and we're going to turn it inside out. You can either use a fabric turner, or if you don't have one, you can actually use a massive safety pin. And I'm actually going to show you guys doing that method, so that way you can see what I do. So I actually start on one end. I put the safety pin on the side that I had my seam here, because it's a little bit more sturdy. Close up my pin. And we're going to put the pin to the inside of the fabric so you'll actually be able to feel the pin here. You're going to scrunch your fabric up onto your pin as you turn. So we're just pulling the fabric through on itself in its nice little casing. So I'm still holding the pin here with this hand. I personally love this trick because sometimes, even with my fabric turner, if that thing comes like closed on the end and it pokes through my fabric and I'm working with something delicate, it'll end up snagging it and it drives me absolutely nuts. But I know with the safety pin, because it's completely closed, I don't have that issue. So again, just working the fabric down and pulling it to turn it. I'm almost to the end here. And then there it is at the end. So I'm just going to pull it and just pull the fabric out. So now we're turned. Okay, so I'm going to go over here just for a quick press over to my machine. You don't have to press out yours, but what I'm going to do is I want to press it because I want to get this seam that we just made. It's a little rolly, you can kind of tell. I just want it to lay a little flatter. And I'm just going to iron it flat, put the seam to one side, so that way it'll lay nice. So when we put our elastic through, it'll have some good volume to it because we've now made it flat. Just ironing it out, making it nice and flat. Okay. So I'll hop back over here. So now that we have our entire piece here, we're actually ready to thread the elastic through. We're going to do the same method that we did when we pulled it through. So we're going to use a safety pin. I'm going to safety pin the end of the elastic, and I'm going to feed it up through the middle of our scrunchie. Make sure that you hold it with the opposite once you get it going in here. So we're feeding the fabric through here. Make sure you're still holding onto the end of the elastic with this hand, otherwise you'll lose your elastic. And that is not the purpose of this. So we want to get the other end to the end of the scrunchie so we can seal it up. Just feeding it through. And there it is. So now onto the other end of my scrunchie. Pull that out. Try to make sure and feel. So at this point, what I always like to do is just try to feel for my elastic and make sure it's flat without any rolls in there, just so when I put it on, it's not like all twisted. So we're going to take our two ends here. You're going to overlap them. About a ½ inch to an inch. Go ahead and take your pin out. And we're going to pin that there so we can stitch along right there. And we're going to close this elastic up so it makes that circle.
So you're now just sewing the elastic, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. We're just going to close it up. We got our circle for our scrunchie. I'm going to go ahead and do it on both sides so it's nice and secure. Where I overlapped it. So I make sure to back stitch at least once through there just to make sure it's really secure. You don't want to go over it more than like 5 or 6 times because elastic, the more and more that you stitch it, the weaker it gets. But I just want it to be made sure it's really nice and in there though. So I'm going to trim up all my threads here. So now we have our elastic is completely enclosed. So now we're going to actually close up our ends here. So you want to make sure, as we always do, right sides are together with our fabric. And again, you don't want to make sure that like your fabric's like twisted around and doing crazy stuff. You want to make sure that they're pretty flush. So you're going to take right side with right side on one side. I'm going to pin that. And we're going to stitch across this line. So where our straight end is on the ends of the scrunchie. And it's kind of annoying because your elastic like wants to get back in the way and stuff. So just really try to scrunch up your fabric on your elastic so it's out of your way. You'll just have to kind of maneuver around it a little bit. So now I'm ready. I've pinned it from this end where the end is across that straight end to the other side. We're literally going to stitch right along here. So it's kind of closed, and then we'll close up that side. So again, stitching across that straight edge end. Again, about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go in, back stitch. I'll continue along that straight edge where I've pinned it. Back stitch when you get to the end, and trim it up. Okay, so now I'm just going to pull it, kind of readjust my fabric here. So now we have everything closed but this gap that we have along the outside of that seam that we made with our scrunchie. So you can do this part one of two ways. First part is you can actually hand stitch it and then you will not see a seam here. Personally, I don't mind having a small tiny seam on the exterior here where we're going to top stitch. I find it the easiest, it takes less time. So that's the way that I'm going to do this one. So you're just gonna see where your seam allowance was here when we were in the center there. We're gonna use that same seam allowance to close this up. So you're gonna fold it under 3/8 of an inch on both sides. I'm gonna pin it so that way it stays. So turn it under 3/8 of an inch. And I'm going to pin those where I folded 3/8 over and over, pin that closed. So now, as you can see, we've closed that hole with our pin. So now we're just going to take a tiny seam allowance, probably like 1/4 or less, and stitch literally that hole closed from here all the way around to right there. And again, if you'd rather do an invisible stitch by hand, that's totally fine. I personally like easy. But if you had something like a really nice expensive fabric or you were selling it to somebody, I would probably hand stitch it if I had the time and depending upon what they wanted. So again, I'm just stitching that little hole shut with that seam allowance turned under just a little bit. Get to the end of it, back stitch, and trim up the threads, because now your scrunchie is done. So now we have our pretty little scrunchie.
That's awesome. That was so easy.
It's so easy and it's so fast. Like I'm telling you, you could literally take any scrap as long as it's long enough, and you can make a scrunchie out of it. I mean, it's not hard at all.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, and I'm glad I did the 4 inches across because I love the extra fluff. I like how it has a little bit more on it. I even saw one tutorial too where they actually made like the oversized scrunchie. So like they would take what our width is of a 7-inch for the tie that we're about to do. And it was thick. I mean, but it was so pretty. When it was done, it was gorgeous. So it really depends on what aesthetically y'all want. So you can change and adapt as much as you want. And since the measurements are so easy, it's completely, at what your preference is, to be honest. So we have now our little scrunchie, and now we're going to make our tie to go with it. So I'm going to set that aside and grab our tie. And again, so this is super easy too. So now we have our 24 by 7 inch width here. We're going to sew it the exact same way that we did the scrunchie, right? So we're going to fold it in half, right sides together again. We're going to stitch down that seam just like we did the scrunchie. And the only difference is we're actually going to leave our opening in the middle of that seam. And I'll show you that here in a second because we're going to close up our ends to make them pretty. So we're going to take this, we're going to fold it in half, right sides facing together again, just like we did that scrunchie. I'm going to pin along this side just because it's really, this fabric is it's a crushed satin, and so it's beautiful and it has a gorgeous hand feel, and it's very drapey, but it loves to shift when you sew it.
What? Come on, get ahead. Come on. Come on.
Go along this end, pinning it. And the thing is about this tutorial too, because they're all straight seams involved, for people who don't have a sewing machine and they'd rather just hand sew this, you totally can. It's not overly complex. If you wanted to do that, you could for sure. So I got a little uneven with my cutting when I did it earlier, so I'm just going to trim up this end really quick. Okay. So now we have our whole tie here. What we're going to do though, so find your center point of your tie, which is like right here where this green pin is. We're not going to stitch when we stitch down our way here, not stitch about 1 inch to 1.5 inches width here, because this is where we're going to turn it inside out. So instead of making my pin go perpendicular to the seam, I'm going to make it go parallel, so that reminds me, hey, don't stitch here. So our next step, so there's 2 ways to do this. If you want to have a tie that has a blunt cut end, where like the end is straight like this, we can literally just sew here and sew down to that part. Personally, I like the slanted look on the ends of mine. So what I would do is, let me go ahead and pin this here. So I'd start my seam here, and instead of stitching straight across, I'm going to stitch at an angle here. Depends on how deep you want your angle. So I want my angle to be about right, I'd say probably right about there. So I'm going to put my pin here, so I know that's where I want it to end. And I'm going to measure from my end here. So it looks like it's about 2.25 inches from this end in. So I'm going to make sure I measure that on my opposite end as well to make sure they match. So there's my straight end. I'm going to go 2.25 inches, which is right there. Which means my diagonal is going to go right through here. Okay, so I will personally do my diagonal ends first before I do my straight edge. So I'm going to start in my diagonal. So you want to make it a straight line from where you start your stitch to where we had marked. So I'm going to position it here and just kind of eyeball it a little bit. If you want to be really exact, take your ruler and fidget it around until you find that spot, just right there. I'm going to sew my diagonal edge, stitch in, And come all the way, not quite to the end, because we're gonna just pivot and go down our seam allowance. So about right there. I'm gonna lift my presser foot, so now we have our diagonal edge back here. And now we're gonna stitch down to where I said to stop in that center piece. So I'm gonna lower my presser foot and keep on going down this edge to that spot. Again, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, so I'm probably gonna stop about right there. Yeah, I could probably go a little more. And back stitch when you finish, and clip. So now we have our diagonal edge, and we came down to our spot we're going to flip. Now we're going to do the same thing to the opposite side. So I'll start from my stopping point here. Start, back stitch, and head down the way. So I get to my pin where I want my diagonal to start, which is right there. So now I'm gonna pick up my presser foot again with my needle down my fabric, line up my straight diagonal line that I want to my end, which is right here. There it is. And I'm going to stitch to that end. Please ignore my beeping. That's my iron automatically turning off in the background. And we get to that end, back stitch. And there's our other pretty diagonal end. So now before we flip this, go ahead and trim your threads. The other thing we're going to do, so where we, and it's hard to see on black, where we have our diagonal stitch, I'm gonna go ahead and trim this excess over here because we won't need that in there, and I'll just add extra bulk. So I'm gonna probably clip right about the same 3/8 seam allowance that we have over here, just so it's all nice and consistent. Just took off that edge so it's nice and pretty. We'll do that to the other side as well. Okay. So now we have that opening that we left here in the center. We're going to use this to flip this. So since this is a lot wider fabric, honestly, you can use your fingers and push it up through the hole. So I'm going to run my thumbs in here till I get to my end, push it in with my pointer finger, and just pull it out. Do the same thing the opposite side. Wiggle my thumbs in, find my point, and press it on my thumb and pull it out. So now we have this lovely tie that we made. So as you can see, our pointy ends are not like fully out. So we want to make sure that we work those guys out. So we have nice, clean, sharp edges. Sometimes what I'll do too, if I can't get it to go out with my fingers, I will take my pin and kind of dig out that end a little bit without pulling too hard because I don't want to hurt my fabric. But try to get that end out so it looks pretty. Like that. Do that to my other side, and then we're going to go press it on the iron so it's nice and flat and pretty. Okay, so I dug out my pretty ends here so we have nice clean edges here. I'm going to go over here to my ironing board real quick, and we're going to flatten this puppy out. Turn that guy back on. So we're just going to do it straight flat with that edge on the ends, just so it's nice and flat. I'm just going down that seam too, and where you have your little opening over here, I just like to go ahead and iron that shut because that's where we're going to stitch next to close up that hole on this. And that way the seam allowance is already tucked in and takes out the guesswork for you when you try to go to pin it. The edge that's not stitched here on this side, make sure it's nice and flat consistently all the way down so it's nice and clean. All right. Extra steam over here. All right, so now we have our cute little tie here. We're gonna go back to our sewing machine and we're gonna close up that hole. So again, same thing as earlier when we closed up our scrunchie in that last step. I wouldn't do more than a 1/4 inch on that tiny little piece there. Or again, you can always hand stitch it if you prefer. So I'm gonna find my little hole, it's right here. I'm gonna start a little bit past my hole. Back stitch a little bit. There's the end of my hole. I'm gonna go past the end of my hole just a smoothie. Back stitch. And now our hole is closed up. And now we have our cute little tie. So here's what I like to do personally. So you can just kind of take your tie here, just kind of bunch it a little bit. There's several ways that you can do this. So if you want to use the tie on your scrunchie, you can do the whole half pull through and tuck your tails into the loop method, which I think is the prettiest personally. And if I'm gonna put it on my here with my knot, I'm actually gonna put it right over where we had that seam where we closed it up. And pull it through. Because now I have this really pretty exterior knot with my scrunchie. And it looks super cute.
It is cute. Very cute.
So then I'll flip it around so y'all can zoom things. So then, yeah, I would literally just put it on and then maneuver the knot to wherever I want it to be. So if I had a low pony, this would really work well with this, but this knot, and it would like just kind of trickle. Wait, did I put it upside down? I did. So now I have my knot positioned, and it's just going to kind of fall down the back.
Very cute.
It's so easy, and that's honestly why I love this little tutorial, because it's extremely easy. The other thing I like to do too is like if I'm wearing like my Apple Watch or something, or want to have like a little wristlet, the other thing you can do too is like just scrunch it and wrap it around your wrist and tie it in a knot on your wrist. For like extra little wrist tie, you can do it in a knot there. You can really put it anywhere. So I like to make them out of the same fabric because then you can use it if you want to, but you don't have to if you don't want to either. So, but yeah, I mean, so fabrics, again, satins work really good for this because they're nice and kind of shiny. Cotton is great because it has more grip to it and it's not gonna slide out. A lot of them are really cute crushed velvet. Anything that's kind of like a rib knit. Rib knits are very in right now, especially for summer with swimsuits. So if you have a swimsuit that you make and you want a matching scrunchie to go with it to the pool, that would be super cute. And really any kind of garment that you make, you can, even if you don't want to do this, you can make a tie. If you want to use the tie just in your hair, you can do that as well without having the extra bulk of the scrunchie too. Also tying in a knot in your hair as well. So
my
I just love this.
granddaughter is coming over today, and I think this would be a great project.
Yes. And it's really good because this one's great for kids because it doesn't take long. They have just enough attention span, and it's simple enough math they can kind of understand the concept. It's not hard.
Well, they sew, so
oh, good.
Yeah, not a
That's
lot.
awesome. Yeah,
but this would be perfect for her. She's such a little fashionista, and
yeah,
you know, she can make whatever she wants when she wants.
That's awesome.
Grandma, can I sew? Yeah, go ahead. So,
that's awesome.
That's really great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so as we said before, Rachel's recorded this. So if there's any questions you need to refer back to on it, you can always refer back to the video. And if for some reason there was something about the instructions when you're trying to teach her that was unclear, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Feel free to send me a message. I'd be happy to answer any
I
questions.
wrote it all down, but yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. You are so welcome. Yeah, this is fun and really easy. I'm actually going to wear this today with my matching slip skirt from last week. So that way I'm all matchy-matchy. So why not? Bye.